Hi folks, I am Marina Namchu and welcome back to my channel Prep Up with Marina. Today I am going to do another short story and the title of the story is A Gorilla in the Guest Room by Gerald Durrell. So let's begin straight away without wasting any time. And just before I begin, I would like to tell you that this is a very lengthy chapter, as you all are aware of it. So probably we might have to do around 2 or 3 videos. So I begin. Dear Mr. Durrell, could you please have our rhesus monkey? Now, rhesus, it's a native to Southern Asia. He is growing so big and jumping on us from trees and doing damage and causing so much trouble. Already, my mother has been in bed with the doctor 3 times. So we can see that this lesson begins with a letter to the narrator. So there is someone who's offering their rhesus monkey. It was towards the end of the second year that I decided that the zoo, not being well established, must cease, that means must stop, to be a mere showplace of animals and start to contribute something towards the conservation of wildlife. So here we see that Gerald, who is the narrator, he has a plan of his own, for his own zoo to conserve wildlife. Sorry. I felt that it would be essential gradually to weed out all the commoner animals in the collection and to replace them with rare and threatened species. So, he wanted to kind of get rid of the more common animals and get the threatened species in his zoo. That is, species which were threatened with extinction in the wild state. The list of these was long and melancholy. In fact, without reptiles, it filled 3 fat volumes. I was wondering which of this massive list of endangered species we could start with, when the decision was taken out of my hands. An animal dealer telephoned and asked me if I wanted a baby gorilla. All right, there is a word here, endangered species, that is a species whose existence is threatened. Gorillas have never been exceptionally numerous as a species, and with the state that Africa was in, politically speaking, at that moment it seemed to me that they might well become extinct within the next 20 years. Newly emergent governments, the new governments that were being formed, are generally far too busy proving themselves to the world for the first few years to worry much about the fate of the wildlife of their country. And history has proved time and time again how rapidly a species can be exterminated, wiped out, even a numerous one. So, the gorilla had been high on my list of priorities. So he was, wanting to conserve, especially the gorillas. I was not convinced, however, that the dealer in question was really expecting a gorilla. In my experience, the average animal dealer can, with difficulty, distinguish between a bird, a reptile, and a mammal. But this is about the extent of his zoological knowledge. I felt that it was more than likely that the baby gorilla would turn out to be a baby chimpanzee. So the narrator was a bit worried, because he kind of did not really trust the knowledge of the animal dealer. He felt that maybe the animal dealer was mixing up between a chimpanzee and a gorilla. However, I could not afford to turn the offer down in case it really was a baby gorilla. How much are you asking for it? I inquired and took a firm grip on the telephone. £1,200, said the dealer. A brief vision of my bank manager's face floated before my eyes, and I repressed it sternly. He repressed it sternly means he tried to, stop himself from remembering or visualizing. All right, I said in what I hoped was a confident voice. I'll meet it at London Airport, and if it's in good condition, I'll have it. I put down the telephone to find Jackie regarding me with a basilisk eye. Now, Jackie is his wife, okay? And then when he placed the receiver on the phone, he noticed that his wife, Jackie, was staring at him or regarding him with a basilisk eyes. Basilisk means, looks that can actually kill a person. What are you going to have? She inquired. A baby gorilla, I said nonchalantly in a very relaxed, very calm manner. Oh, how lovely, said Mother enthusiastically. They're such dear little things. Jackie was more practical. How much? She asked. As a matter of fact, it's very reasonable, I said. You know how rare gorillas are, and you know that our policy now is to concentrate on the rare things. I feel this is a wonderful opportunity. How much? Jackie interrupted brutally, almost harshly, His wife wanted to know the price that he would have to pay for the baby gorilla that he was talking about. £1,200, I replied, and waited for the storm. He was waiting for Jackie to, scream at him. £1,200? £1,200? You must be mad. You've got an overdraft, the size of the national debt, and you go and say you'll pay £1,200 for a gorilla? You must be out of your mind. Where do you think we're going to find £1,200, for heaven's sake? And what do you think the bank manager is going to say when he hears? You must be stark, staring mad. That means you must be absolutely mad. Where are you going to get all that money? Especially that you have an overdraft. An overdraft means a deficit bank account, okay, which is caused by drawing more money than the account actually holds. I shall get the money from other sources, I said austerely. Austerely means very plainly. Don't you realize that this island is infested with rich people who do nothing all day long and revolve from one cocktail party to another like a set of Japanese waltzing mice? It's about time they made a contribution towards animal conservation. I shall ask them to contribute the money. So how was Gerald going to collect the money? He was going to ask all the rich, the wealthy people on the island. All right? That's an even stupider idea than saying you'll have the gorilla in the first place, said Jackie. Jackie couldn't imagine, people, her husband asking people to donate for the gorilla that he was planning to have. And she couldn't imagine the people giving money. Ignoring my wife's pessimistic means, when a person always expects the worst, okay? Ignoring my wife's pessimistic and antisocial outlook, I picked up the telephone and asked for a number. Hello, Hope? Jerry here. Hello, said Hope resignedly. What can I do for you? Hope, I want you to give me a list of all the richest people on the island. All the richest people? Said Hope in bewilderment in confusion. Now what are you up to? Well, I've just been offered a baby gorilla at a very reasonable price, £1,200. Only I don't happen to have £1,200 at the moment. The rest of my sentence was drowned by Hope's rich laughter. She found it really ridiculous. So you hope to get the wealthy of the island to buy it for you, she said chartingly. Jerry, really, you're a dotty. Dotty means You're crazy. I don't see what's wrong with the idea, I protested. They should be glad to contribute towards buying such a rare creature. He was very optimistic that people would really help him to get the gorilla. After all, if breeding colonies of things like gorillas aren't established in captivity soon, there won't be any left at all. Surely these people realize this. I'm afraid they don't, said Hope. I realize it, and you realize it. But I'm afraid the average person either doesn't or couldn't care less. I suppose you're right, I said gloomily. Anyway, I think it's worth a try, don't you? It's worth a try, but I wouldn't pin too much faith on their generosity if I were you. I wouldn't pin too much faith, that means I wouldn't bank on them too much, said Hope. Anyway, give me half an hour and I'll ring you back. Half an hour later, Hope dictated a list of about 50 people over the telephone, while I wrote them down feverishly, very intensely active, okay? He was excited. I looked up the telephone numbers, took a deep breath and started. So he started calling up the wealthy people one by one. Good morning, Mrs. McGurgle. Gerald Durrell from the zoo here. I'm so sorry to worry you, but we've just been offered a baby gorilla at a very reasonable price, £1,200. Well, yes, but it's not expensive for a gorilla. Well, I was wondering if you'd care to purchase a small portion of it, say a leg or something. You would? That's immensely kind of you. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye. So what was he doing? Gerald was selling, not selling, actually, yes, it was kind of selling. He was asking the wealthy people to buy a portion of the gorilla. Could be a leg or a hand or the head, So that way he was planning to get the money. By lunchtime, I had collected £200. Only another 1,000 to go, and the gorilla was mine. It was at this point that I discovered the next person on the list was Major Domo. I had never met him, and I had no idea how he would react to the suggestion that he might buy a bit of gorilla. To my immense relief, the suggestion seemed to amuse him, for he chuckled. That means he laughed quietly when he heard, whatever Jerry had to tell him. How much is it? He asked. £1,200, I said. And how much have you collected already? £200. Well, said Major Domo, you'd better come along this afternoon and I'll find you the balance. So Major Domo seemed to be a very generous person. So he was willing to buy the rest of the gorilla. To say I was speechless means nothing. When I had gone to the telephone, I thought there might be a chance of getting £25, possibly even 50. 100 would have been beyond the dreams of avarice. Avarice means greed. And here was Major Domo handing me a baby gorilla on a platter, so to speak. On a platter, so to speak, means, he was getting it so easily. I stammered my thanks, slammed down the telephone, and rushed round the zoo, telling everyone of the fact that we were going to have a baby gorilla. The great day came and I flew over to London Airport to collect the ape. My one fear now was that when I arrived there, it would turn out to be a chimpanzee after all. So he was very worried about the fact that the animal dealer, shouldn't actually get confused between the chimpanzee and a gorilla. The dealer met me and escorted me to a room in the animal shelter of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. He threw open the door, and the first thing I saw was a couple of baby chimpanzees sitting on a table meditatively, very thoughtfully, chewing bananas. My heart sank. He thought that he would be getting a chimpanzee instead of a gorilla. My heart sank, and I had visions of having to go back to Jersey empty-handed. But the dealer walked over to a crate. A crate is a large wooden container. He walked over to a crate in the corner and opened the door. And Pongo walked into my life. Now here I would like to tell you that it is written N Pongo, but N is silent, so you pronounce just Pongo. He stood about 18 inches high and was quite the most handsome and healthy looking baby gorilla I had ever seen. So this is the description about Pongo. He strolled, he walked very casually, very slowly, in a very pleasant and relaxed way. Stockily, why? Because he was physically short and he was heavy. He strolled stockily across the room towards me and then held up his arms to be lifted up. I was amazed at how heavy he was for his size, and I soon realized that this was all solid bone and muscle. There was not a spare ounce of fat on him. His light chocolate-colored fur was thick and soft, and the skin on his hands, feet, and face was soft and glossy as patent leather. What is patent leather? It is leather which is very glossy. His eyes were small and deep-set, twinkling like chips of coal. He lay back in my arms and studied me carefully with an unwinking stare, and then lifted a fat and gentle forefinger and investigated my beard. I tickled his ribs, and he wriggled about in my arms. He wriggled, okay? Giggling hoarsely, giggling roughly, his eyes shining with amusement. I sat him down on a convenient table and handed him a banana, which he accepted with little bear-like growlings of pleasure. All right, those were the deep sounds made by Pongo, which showed that he was very happy, and ate very daintily compared to the chimpanzees, who were stuffing their mouths as full as they could. I wrote out the check, and then we bundled Pongo, growling protests, back into the crate and went off to catch the plane for Jersey. When we landed at the airport, I took Pongo out of his crate and we drove to the zoo with him, sitting on my lap, taking a great interest in the cows we passed, and occasionally turning around so that he could peer up into my face. When we arrived, I carried him up to our flat, for his cage was not quite ready, and I had decided that he would have to spend a couple of days in our guest room. So the cage where Pongo was supposed to have been kept, it was not yet ready. So the narrator, he decided to keep Pongo in their guest room. His very serious, courteous, very polite manners and his rather sad expression immediately won over both Jackie and my mother, and before long he was lolling back on the sofa while they plied him with delicacies, and the staff came upstairs one by one to pay homage to him, as if he were some black potentate. All right. So, after he arrived at the flat, Jackie, that is Gerald's wife, and his mother, they fell in love with Pongo straight away. And then very soon, he was lolling back on the sofa. That means he was in a very relaxed manner. He was just lying around on the sofa while they plied him. Plied him means supplied him with the various delicacies. And the staff in the zoo, they also came up to pay homage to him as if he was some black potentate. Potentate means, a ruler who has a lot of power. Having previously suffered by keeping Chumley, the chimpanzee, in the house, I knew from bitter experience that there was nothing like an ape for turning a civilized room into something closely resembling a bomb site in an incredible short space of time. So I watched Pongo like a hawk. So, earlier we come to know that the narrator had also kept a chimpanzee known as Chumley, and Chumley was a very destructive creature, so the narrator was a bit worried that Pongo would also upset the guest room or the house in total. When he became bored with lying on the sofa, he decided to make a circuit of the room. He decided to roam around in the room to examine anything of interest. So he walked slowly around like a small black professor in a museum, pausing now to look at a picture, now to stroke an ornament, but doing it so gently that there was never any danger that he would break anything. So unlike Chumley, Pongo turned out to be very, very gentle, especially when he was, touching things around the house. After the attitude I was used to with Chumley, I was captivated, he was totally attracted, taken up by Pongo's beautiful behavior. He could not imagine, a wild animal so courteous and so gentle. You would have thought that he had been brought up in a house to watch him. So, he behaved in such a way as if he had been with human beings earlier living in a house. Apart from a slight hiatus means, a pause in a certain activity, when he wet the floor, and he could not be expected to know that this was not done in the best circles. How would he have known that he is not supposed to wet the floor? His behavior was exemplary, so much so that by the time we put him to bed, my mother was doing her best to try to persuade me to keep him in the house permanently. So, except for the fact that sometimes, Pongo would wet the floor, otherwise he was a perfect, animal. And the narrator's mother, grew so fond of him that by the end of it, she was requesting him, pleading with him to keep Pongo in the house permanently. I had, however, learnt my lesson with Chumley, and I turned a deaf ear to her pleas. But we are told that, the narrator refuses his mother's requests because he had earlier experienced, he had a pretty bad experience with the chimpanzee Chumley, whom he had kept in his house. Pongo, of course, did not leave the guest room in the condition that he found it. Of course, he wouldn't have left it, totally spick and span. But this was only to be expected because he was an animal. Although his manners were exemplary, he was only a baby and could not be expected automatically to assume civilized behavior because he was living in the house. So, the guest room, when he left it, bore numerous traces of his presence. On one wall, for instance, was something that resembled a map of Japan drawn by one of the more inebriated means heavily drunk, ancient mariners. Mariners means a sailor. It was as if an ancient, mariner had drawn the map of Japan. That was the mark, the trace that Pongo had left on one of the walls in the guest room. This was nicely executed in scarlet and was due to the fact that I had thought Pongo might like some tinned raspberries. So what happened was, Pongo had been given raspberries. So therefore, this particular mark on the wall was scarlet in color. He had liked them, and his enthusiasm at this new addition to his diet has resulted in the map of Japan. There was also straw. Next to paraffin, I know of no other commodity that manages to worm its way in a positively parasitic fashion into every nook and cranny before you are aware of it. For months after Pongo's sojourn means time, a period of time spent in our guest room, we were apologizing to guests for the floor, which in spite of hoovering means, cleaning with the vacuum cleaner, looked like a 16th century alehouse, because the floor had become pretty dirty. All right. So it represented, the floor of a 16th century alehouse. Alehouse is, it's a place where you drink. All right. There was also the fact that the handle on the door drooped, it was bent, at rather a depressed angle, since Pongo, after receiving his meal, had attempted to follow me out of the room. Knowing that the handle by some magical means opened and closed the door, but not knowing exactly how to manipulate it, he had merely pulled it downwards with all his strength. So, Pongo had, noticed the narrator opening the door by, manipulating the handle, okay, by using the handle. So, but he did not know how to do it. So what he had done was he must have hung on it, okay, so it was kind of drooping. As I tried unsuccessfully to bend the handle back into position again, I reflected that Pongo was only about 2 years old and that his strength would increase in proportion to his size. So, considering the fact that he was only 2 years old, he was very strong. This is what the narrator wants to tell us. One of the things which particularly interested me about him was his different approach to a problem or a situation. If, for example, a baby chimpanzee is used to being brought out of its cage on being reincarcerated means after being imprisoned again, it will carry on like one of the more loquacious means talkative heroines in a Greek tragedy, tearing its hair, rolling with rage on the floor, screaming at the top of its voice and drumming its heels on every available bit of woodwork. That was how one of the chimpanzees would have reacted, after after being imprisoned again. Pongo was quite otherwise, but Pongo, he behaved in a different manner. Although deploring means he disliked it too, all right? He disliked being imprisoned in a cage, all right? So although deploring it, he would accept the necessity of being locked up again in his cage. He would try his best to divert you from this course of action. He would try to, kind of get away, try to avoid being locked up. But when he realized that it had become inevitable, he would submit with good grace. But eventually he would give in and then he would enter his cage. His only protest would be a couple of sharp and faintly peevish screams. Peevish means, something that, showing irritation, okay? Peevish screams as he saw you disappear. Whereas the average chimpanzee of his age and with his background would have gone on having hysterics. Hysterics means uncontrolled behavior, like when a person or an animal keeps on crying and screaming, okay, for a considerable length of time. Owing to his attractive appearance and disposition, his good manners and his very well-developed sense of humor, Pongo was in a very short space of time the darling of the zoo because of his behavior, okay. So all the staff members, they really liked Pongo. Every fine afternoon, he was brought out onto the lawn in front of the yew hedge. All right, what is yew hedge? Yew is a species of the coniferous trees. And there he would show off to his admirers, either lolling in the grass, just lying around, in a very relaxed manner, with a bored expression on his face, or with a wicked gleam in his eyes, working out how he could pose for his photograph to be taken by some earnest visitor and then rush forward at the crucial moment, just at the moment when the photographer is about to click the photograph, grasp the unfortunate person's leg and push it from under him. A task that gave him immense amusement and generally resulted in the visitor sustaining a slipped disc and having an excellent picture of a completely empty section of lawn. So, when the weather was fine, Pongo used to be taken out on the lawn, and some sincere, very earnest visitor would want to take a picture of Pongo. So he would, loll around on the grass, and then just at the moment when the photographer was ready to take his photograph, he would go and pull the person's leg, and the person would he would fall. And then normally what happened was the person would suffer from a slipped disc, all right? And then the photographer would only be able to capture the sky. So boys and girls, with this I'm going to stop the lesson here, as I've already mentioned that the chapter is very long. So please don't forget to watch the next video, where I will be continuing the explanation for the lesson a gorilla in the guest room. So with that, bye bye.